Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me today for Docker Singapore Meetup Community event. I hope you are having a great start of the day. Thanks to Vivian and the team for inviting me for this meetup event. Today I am here to talk about what's new in Docker Desktop 4.15 release. In the next 30 to 35 minutes, I am going to talk about the major highlight of this release. So let's jump in. So before we start with the agenda, here's a little about myself. My name is Ajeet Raina. I work for Docker as a DevRel manager. I am a Docker captain since last 6 years. I'm also part of Docker community leader group, and I run a community of around 12,000 members here in Bangalore. We do conduct meetup almost every 2 months, and the community is quite active. In the past, I worked for the companies like VMware, Dell EMC, CGI, and Redis. Now in this session, I am going to touch base on all the new features which has been introduced in the Docker desktop, primarily talking about what has been released in the last 3 to 4 months. I will start my presentation with the dev environments. I know as a developer, you are always excited about the dev environments. In the dev environment, we recently introduced a dev environment CLI, which means that you don't really have to go ahead and stick to the dashboard. Sitting within the CLI, you can go ahead and run those commands and bring up your applications with all the tools necessaries for your apps. Then in the same way, I am going to also show you how the Chrome extension, the new Chrome extension which we introduced for the dev environment. So this is really cool and I'm sure you are going to love it. We have been hearing a lot about the WebAssembly, so I have few of the slides, but I know that today there is a presentation from the Michael where he is going to talk about the WebAssembly. So I'm not going to do a kind of a demo, but talk about few of the feature enablement which has been done in the Docker desktop. Then I have few of the slides on herb search capabilities and the extension which I am going to cover. So let's go ahead and look at all of these, basically the new features. Now, first of all, I would like to give you a quick glimpse of how the Docker landscape look like. So in the last 3 years, Docker has heavily focused on the developer tools, right? So Docker is a suite of software development tools for creating, sharing, and running your individual containers, right? It started with all the great developer experience. You can just bring up the new application with a single commands like docker run, docker pull, right? So Docker is a containerized platform that package your application and all your dependencies together in the form of a Docker container. And that to ensure that your application works seamlessly in any of the environments. So primarily, if you have seen the last 3 years, the major focus of Docker um, as a company has been in the two major platforms. One is the Docker Desktop and Docker Hub. Okay. Now, as you all know, that Docker Hub is the largest, the world largest repository of Docker images within an array of content sources, which includes container, community developers, open source projects, ISVs, building and distributing the core in the containers, right? So user get access to those free public repository for storing and sharing the images, or they can choose their own subscription plan for the private repos too, right? So Docker Desktop today has not just been a playground for the developers today, it has also become a matured platform, and that is our the next bucket. So on on the desktop side, we have all the three different offerings like Linux, Windows, and Mac. So in terms of Linux, we support Ubuntu, Debian, Arch Linux, right? You can download the bits from our official chat and use it on top of all this platform. Now, if you use Windows or Linux server, then you do have the open source Docker engine which you can run, and it is supported on not only on x86 today, but you can also run it on ARM platform like Raspberry Pi and Jetson. So we talked about the SaaS platform. We talked about the desktop. We talked about the server where you can run the free Docker engine, and in addition to that, we have a number of tools which developers has been using in the past so many years. And these, as Docker is majorly focusing on bringing those tools to the developers, we have bunch of open source as well as the integrated tools like Docker Compose, Docker Build Kit, Docker Dev environments, and recently we also introduced Docker extension. I do have a few of the slides which talks about that. Now, coming to the Docker desktop, so I'm not going to go in depth into each of these features, but I just want to highlight that there are primarily six features which Docker is heavily focusing on. And that too is a dev environment and extensions where you see a lot of the improvement in terms of especially the enhancement and the feature request has been raised. We do have an extension which basically extend the functionality, support for containerd. The one reason why Wasm containers run today side by side on the Docker desktop is basically the containerd. You have to go ahead and enable the containerd to make it work. Now, apart from that, we do have a support for vulnerability scanning, which comes. So I do have a few of the demos which I'm going to show you where you can go ahead and scan it. So it is well integrated. You have a search capability which is integrated, and apart from that, we have also the support for the Kubernetes. Right, you can today run the Kubernetes pods and stateful sets, stateless sets. Everything is there. Right, you just have to go ahead and run it. Now let's jump into the first feature and let's see what enhancement has been made in the dev environment feature. Now, if you look at a traditional Docker workflow, it all starts with you as a developer building an application using a Docker file and deploying it on the Docker Compose. So you build an application sitting on your laptop, and then once you do that, you push it and share it to your colleagues or the community to the Docker Hub, right? And then your colleagues or your customer or your client just basically pull that repo, especially the image repository, and try to run those containers, right? So this is basically a traditional workflow, and usually the traditional workflow works like, if you are dealing with a GitHub, so most probably you clone the repo, you install the repo, and you bring up the application with Docker Compose up. Now, the challenges with this traditional approach is that when you start building those applications, you need number of the tools which you require, the developer tools which you require to bring up those applications. One example is a VS Code, right? You need to have installed, you need to have a VS Code installed on your machine. You need to have a Git has to be installed. If you are working on Windows or Linux, you have a different version of GitHub desktop which you go ahead and deploy it, right? And that is where all the challenges come into the picture, because as a developer you really have to install everything from the scratch. Even you go to the VS Code and try to run some kind of a Python the code, you need few of the Docker modules which has to be installed, right? So there's a lot of dependency which come into the picture. So that's where your dev environment come into the picture. Now the beauty of the dev environment is that it creates a developer environment for you, like more precisely a configurable developer environment with all the codes, with all the tools which you require to quickly get your application up and running. It uses tools built into the code editors, which allows the Docker to access the code mounted into your container rather than your host. So when I say code mounted in your container, basically package your application in such a way that you don't have a dependency on the local host itself, which means that there is again the level of isolation of these tools, files, and running services on your machines, which allows the multiple version of them to exist side by side. So today, so I'm going to show you a quick demo around how the dev environment works, but just dev environment works. But at the same time, one thing to realize is like today, it's not just about the dashboard. You can even use a CLI to get your application up and running. So the new feature coming to the dev environments, if you have used in the past, is the first thing is dev environment CLI. Definitely, we have a Docker dev start, Docker dev ls, all those specific commands are available today. So you can use the Docker dev environment using the GUI dashboard, but at the same time, you can also run it through the terminal. Okay. The second thing is, with the latest 4.15 release, you have so you have a dev environments which allows you to clone a Git repo to your local bind mount, and you can use any of your preferred local editor. So it is not just about the VS Code. If you want to even use the IntelliJ, you can go ahead, specify the path where this IntelliJ application is sitting, and then you should be able to use it. So Docker Desktop, starting with 4.15, it supports the different types of the editors, not just VS Code but also the IntelliJ. The third thing which I want to talk about, which is newly introduced, is a new Chrome extension, which means that if you have any repository, right, which you have created, so right on the GitHub, you can see open Chrome extension, you click on it, and directly it will go ahead and try to deploy this application, using the dev environment features. So we are going to see that in a couple of minutes. The other thing is, even if you look at, if you are aware, the Awesome Compose repository, where is basically the group of the bunch of sample applications. There also you can just go to the GitHub and you can trigger the dev environment right from your GitHub repository, right? Okay, so let me show you a quick demo around the dev environment feature quickly. Okay, so let me go ahead and click on one of the sample applications. So this is one of the sample application which I'm going to pick up, Slack clone Docker. It's basically a mun stack which includes all those MongoDB, Express, React.js, Node, and Docker Desktop. And as I said, right, with the Chrome extension, you will see dev environment, right here. The option is right here, one, because you need to have a dev environment Chrome extension up and running. Once I go ahead and click on it, so most probably it will end up in the Docker dev environment. I will say get started. It's already, the repo has already been there, and I will say test Slack clone, and this shows you an existing repository right here. The Visual Studio Code, I am going to select it and I will say clone. Now what is going to happen during this time? So when I go ahead and click on it, most probably it will clone the repo inside a volume. It will determine the best image for your dev environment. It will install the credential helpers. The credential helper is basically a suite of programs to use the native store to keep your Docker credentials safe. It will clone the repo to com.docker.devenvironments.code. It will detect the main language of your repository and it will bring up your container services. So as you can see, it has already started few of the containers. I will go ahead and try to open it under the VS Code. Okay, so let's wait for some time till the time it comes up. Okay, so you will see here the Visual Studio Code is already up and running. You can see here the compose-dev.yaml file gets already created. So I am going to go ahead, open up the terminal here, new terminal, and say docker compose up. Once I do this, my application comes up flawlessly. So I can easily look at the containers and I can see here my applications are up and running. So you can easily see here few of the application have always come up. So I can click on 3000 port and my Slack clone app is up and running. So as you can see, the dev environment feature, which is really easy, one can go ahead and bring up the application directly from your GitHub. Now this is what we have seen. Now there is other feature which I was talking about is the dev environment CLI, which I am going to show you. In the dev environment CLI, you can easily go ahead and bring up the application directly from your console too. So let me show you that particular example too. I'm going to quickly show you how it works. So this is my console. So let me minimize this, bring up this application. So now you can see here the way how I'm going to do it is we do have a Docker dev, the Docker CLI interface. I can easily go ahead and say Docker dev create and specify the whole path of the application in terms of Docker samples and Slack clone Docker. So it will basically perform the same steps which we did in the dashboard. So you get an ability where you can deploy your application using dev environment to the CLI. Okay. Now let it go ahead and deploy it. Till the time, let us jump directly to our slides. So I will start the slideshow here. So this is how we have already seen that. Okay, so now we come to the next section called as Docker plus Wasm integration. There has been a lot of buzz around Wasm since the last KubeCon. Wasm refers to the WebAssembly. So WebAssembly is not quite a assembly language. It is not meant for any specific machine. It is for the web browser. And when you are delivering the code to be executed in the web browser, you really don't know what kind of machine will your code be running on. Okay, so Wasm is a new binary based programming language and which we can run in the web browser. It is designed to be faster than JavaScript because it is a low level language, right? And it means that it is very much closer to your machine code where processors can execute more quickly, right? Now why is Docker enabling the architecture for these Wasm containers? So Docker community right now it sees Wasm as a complementary technology to Linux container. This is where your developers can choose or has the freedom to choose which technology they want to use. And as the community explores what's possible with Wasm, the effort is to make the Wasm application easier to develop, build, and run using the experience and the tools which you have been getting in terms of other platforms, right? Say Linux or Windows containers, right? So Docker is trying to solve that tradition problem. It works on my machine, it works on yours, and now in the production. So okay. So with the new Docker desktop, what we have seen here, you can now manage both the Linux and the Wasm containers. So with the new release, you have seen, the WebAssembly integration capabilities has been integrated, and that too with the help of Containerd. So if you really want to run Wasm containers, then first thing which you need to do is go ahead, enable the Containerd, and then run it. Now this is one of the example which I have shown you, especially on how it look like. You will see that when you run a Wasm container, there is a label called Wasm32 which gets displayed. Now, one of the thing which you might be thinking about is how this entire integration is possible, and thanks to Wasm Edge. So Docker collaborated with Wasm Edge to create a kind of a containerd shim. The Wasm Edge, if you are new, basically it is a very lightweight, high performant and extensible WebAssembly runtime. So the containerd shim, what it does, it basically extracts the Wasm Edge Wasm module from OSI artifacts, and then it tries to run it using the Wasm Edge runtime. Okay, since we already have the track which talks about Wasm, I will just end up with one slide talking about the resources. So if you are really interested to contribute and see number of number of stuffs which are happening around Wasm, do visit this particular link. Okay, so we come to the next section called as new hub search capabilities. I'm going to spend like 5 minutes time in order to display you how we can use a search capability and bring up the Mongo database. I'm choosing the Mongo. The reason being I have been the example which I showed is basically the MERN stack, and Mongo is very critical component. So when I started using the Docker desktop, that was the first container which you use. So let me directly jump into Docker desktop and show you a few of the examples. So I will open up the dashboard here. Okay. And you can quickly see here that there is a button called as search. I will just search for Mongo here. It will pick up all the official images from the Docker Hub. So I am going to pick up the first one and try to run it. Okay. Now once I do this, most probably I should be able to go ahead and connect to it. So how to connect it? I will click on terminal, say bash. Okay. And then there are certain couple of commands which I'm going to run. So the first thing which I'm going to do is, if I really want to connect to it, I will just say mongosh. Once I do this, I am already connected to the MongoDB. I can also use username and password for it. So I will say use Collabnix. I will switch on to the database. Let me quickly try to add few of the entries. Since I have been leading Docker Bangalore community, I will just go ahead and add one of the document which is in the form of the JSON, which is specify the name, city, country. Okay. And if I really want to see how many number of what number of documents which I have added, I can easily go and say db meetup count. So these are basically what we call as the collections. The db.meetup is the name of the collection which I have been using. If I really want to go ahead and add multiple entries, I can always add it like this, okay, which is again a JSON format of it. And if I want to count the documents, it's say 5. So it becomes so easy for me to go ahead and use a search capability to bring up a container, supply the environmental variable, and deploy my application. Right? Okay. Now, going back to the slides, I think these are the slides which I have captured. I have shown you the few examples, and if you want to learn more, this is particular link. I am going to share my slides to your meetup community so that you can click on those links and access it. Okay, so now we come to the last section called as what's new in Docker extension. To just show you an overview of the new extension look and feel. So if you have seen, right now we have around 32 extensions are basically the tools which extends the functionality of your Docker desktop. Think of it as like if you want to use, if you are using some kind of a third-party tool and if you want to integrate with the Docker desktop, this is one way you can do it. Now, if you go to the Docker dashboard, so let me jump directly to the Docker dashboard and show you how the extension look like. So this is an extension tab. We have introduced the three different options: browse, manage, and build. Under the browse, you can see all those extensions. Right now, we have around 32 different extension. You can filter it in terms of, okay, which are the most installed. You will see here the disk uses, the log explorer are the one which are more used. So to give you some of the examples here, so if you see here right now, we have a Mongo container which is up and running. So I will go ahead and try to see if I can pick up most installed one, the disk usage. I will just go ahead and install it. Now this is an extension which is built by the Docker team for you to go ahead and see what percentage of the disk has been used by the specific container. So if I go to the disk usage, it can show me all the information about, okay, what are the total number of images, what are the size it is being, which can be reclaimed, and all these things. So if you see here, the 5.43 GB is reclaimable. I will just click on it and it will show me all those, I can select all those unwanted objects here and say delete. And by the end of this operation, you will see that most of these unclaimed, reclaimed space which you can claim it, right? So right now it shows around 5.43, but during the course of time it should become 0 right now. So you see here the 0 bytes, and you have the total size of this which has been consumed, which is again reduced, right? So there are few of the extension which has like a directly integration of third party. Let me show you that. So if you go to the browse, there is a very latest extension which has been built by one of the active community member, which is a dive tool. So this is the most pulled Docker image in the Docker Hub today, and I want you to go ahead and look into this particular project. It's an open source project, so let us go ahead and install this. Now once you click on install, it basically runs in the form of the containers, okay, and within no seconds you have the whole application up and running, right? So right now if you see, we have only a single Mongo Docker image, that's why it is displaying. I will click on analyze, and it will show me all the different, it will show me all the details around the layers. It will discover the way how I can shrink that particular image, right? So let's wait for some time and try to see if we can view all those layers. So if you see the total size of the image, and there is an efficiency score which is basically kind of a calculation it does in terms of how you have used the Docker file, okay, considering, it might consider a different like a multi-stage build or something like that, how you have built this. It will also display the largest files and the layers, all this in a single shot. So extension, basically what it does, it you can extend the capability of the desktop. Now one of the most popular extension which I have been using heavily is a logs explorer. Okay, I can go ahead, install the log explorer, and it shows me all the running and the stopped containers, their logs, all the details just on top of your on top of your Docker dashboard. So if you see here, I have one of the Mongo which is running, right? It will show me all this information about the logs. I can also filter out few of them in terms of the terms and all this thing. So with this, we are done with this section of Docker extension. There is a link called as Docker Community Extension, which the Collabnis community has been maintaining, which has more than around 100 plus extensions. So if you are interested, just click on it and you will see a list of all the marketplace as well as the community extension. Okay, so with this, we are towards the end of the session. If in case you have any queries, just visit forums.docker.com and raise your query, or you can directly reach out to me. And I would like to thank everyone in the meetup community today listening to my talk. With this, thank you and have a great day.